I am absolutely thrilled to be in conversation today with historian and writer Iftikhar Malik, and particularly grateful that he stepped in to join us at such short notice. Iftikhar is an Emeritus Professor of History at Bath Spa University, where he taught courses on topics including the contemporary Muslim world, the Muslim diaspora, and modern Asia. He is the author of 20 books on subjects as varied as Pashtun identity, Islam and modernity, and the role of British scholars and travellers in curating lived Islam in the Muslim world. Today, we will mostly be discussing his 2020 book, The Silk Road and Beyond, Narratives of a Muslim Historian, though I expect that our conversation will meander into many related areas. In the latter part of the session, I will invite questions from the audience. Do please click on the Ask a Question button at the bottom of the screen to write your question, and we will endeavour to answer as many of them as possible during the time available. Iftikhar, the first thing I'd like to ask you about is the early history of the Silk Road. Who were the first people to travel along these famous routes, and what do we know about them?
Well, first of all, thank you, Sophie, and the Royal Society for Asian Affairs and our Uzbek colleagues for pioneering this very timely literary festival. And I'm very much delighted to be part of it, and I've been attending all the sessions. And it's wonderful that so many literary activities, intellectual activities are happening in Uzbekistan and all around. And I think such efforts are meant to convey those literary creations to the world outside, whether they're written in Uzbek or Persian or Russian. I think we got to know more about Central Asia. People are more focused on the Silk Road, a very romantic idea of the Silk Road. But what about the people? What about their cultures? What about their past histories? What about their struggles today? And what about their arts and literature and cuisine, all these things? And I think this literary festival would go a long way in introducing Central Asia to the rest of the world. Silk Road is a term which we all know was introduced by a German cartographer in 1877. But it's not a proper road even today. It's deserts, rivers, valleys, mountains from one end of Asia to the other, and connecting this central part of Asia to the subcontinent, to Iran, to Russia, and to the Near East, and to places like Italy, Greece, Eastern Mediterranean, and Africa. And basically, lots of travelers have used it. Spies have used it in more recent times. Scholars have traversed from one end to the other. And religions and cultures and handicrafts. We only know about sericulture, the silk culture. But for millennia, people have been moving, and handicrafts have been moving, goods have been moving, ideas and civilization have been moving from one end to the other. So we know that Bukhara, for example, is a Sanskrit word, which means that this was part of a culture which spoke Sanskrit. And Bukhara means Vikhara, which means a holy temple. So this whole region, which we call Uzbekistan, is Sogdiana. And further south is Gandhara, which includes northern Pakistan. So when we look at the religions, and we are getting more and more information from all kind of archives that people are sort of locating in caves and other places, we see that great religion like Hinduism, Buddhism, Zoroastrianism, Islam, Christianity, Judaism, all these religions flourished on the Silk Road and the regions around the Silk Road. Hinduism and Buddhism came from the subcontinent. They went into Tibet, into China, into Central Asia. Zoroaster, the prophet, was born in Urgench, which is western part of Uzbekistan. And I'm glad that Uzbekistan has created a whole park by the Oxus River in this historic city of Urgench, which is called Zoroaster Park. And there's a museum, and there's a sculpture of the fire temple, and underneath is the sculpture of Avesta. I was overjoyed when I visited that historic site. So Zoroastrian religion came into Afghanistan, into northwestern India, which is Pakistan today. Same with Buddhism. went through Karakoram Mountains, Hindu Kush Mountains, into Tibet, into China. So most of the adherents and followers of Buddhism are now in China, in Tibet, and further east. So I would say scholars, Sufis, saints, ideas, religions, faiths, technologies, literature, languages, warriors, conquerors, they all used one part of the Silk Road or the other. We know about Marco Polo in more recent times, medieval times. But some of the earliest visitors must have been these holy people, holy men, whether they were Zoroastrians or Buddhists or Jains or, or Hindu. And then we see Chinese scholars, for example, coming into the subcontinent via the Silk Road. And this is an early Christian period. We know about Fahian, the Song. They took Buddhist scriptures with them, and they spread Buddhism in Tibet and China. Earlier, we know about Alexander, who came all the way to destroy the Persian Empire. And then he went through Afghanistan into Uzbekistan. He married an Uzbek lady. He captured Samarkand, the old part of Samarkand, which we call Afrasiab today. And then Alexander went into India, and some of those Greeks were left behind in Uzbekistan and in present-day Pakistan. There is a narrative that Alexander was surprised that while he was in Samarkand, people were drinking Greek wine, and they were speaking Greek language, some of them. So you could see that there were visitors and travelers and knowledgeable people from as far as Greece and Rome. And then I think the monks and the Pandits and the Brahmins, I think after the Chinese, most of the Muslim publicists came into Central Asia from the Middle East and from Iran. Holy Prophet's cousin, Qasim bin Abbas, is buried in Samarkand in the famous cemetery called Shah-e-Zinda. So he is called the living saint, and lots of beautiful tombs around Qasim bin Abbas's tomb itself. And they are related to Tamerlane, or they are related to other famous people in the past. And then we see even in the 9th century, Ibn Fadla, who is considered to be one of the earliest Muslim travelers into parts of Scandinavia and the Balkans. People say that he is the first writer who wrote something on the Vikings. So he came all the way from Baghdad when the Abbasids ruled this part of the world. And, the Abbasid captured the Umayyads captured Central Asia in 712, exactly the time when they captured Spain and when they captured Indus Valley. And then after the Umayyads came the Abbasids. And then the Abbasids, this was a stronghold of the Abbasids, because in 751, in neighboring Kazakhstan, in Talash, the Arabs, the Abbasids, they defeated the Chinese. And they got lots of Chinese prisoners who taught them about gunpowder and about the paper. And that is how paper and gunpowder came to be known in the Near East, in South Asia, and in Europe. So this Arab conquest of Central Asia is very important. And after that, you see lots of, Turkish people became Muslim, and there are conversions taking place amongst local people to Islam. And also there is a parallel conversion to Judaism. So you see Jewish community in Central Asia from one end to the other, maybe from the time of ancient Persians, and then with the Muslims, the Jews came from Iran into Central Asia. Even today, in Samarkand, in Bukhara, major cities, you have huge Jewish cemeteries and some remaining Jewish communities. So in other words, with this new energy and with this new faith of Islam, Central Asia became a focal point in Islamic civilization. And in my book, actually, I've devoted 2 chapters to Bukhara, 2 to Samarkand. The idea is that this part of Asia or the Muslim world, which was cut off because of colonialism in the Muslim world and Russian colonialism of Central Asia, that all these connected relationships ended. So it's only in recent time that people have come to know more about Central Asia. This is after a gap of a couple of centuries. So now people are trying to learn more about Central Asia. But there were lots of Central Asians who influenced scholarship in India and as far as England. So lots of interaction, lots of individuals, lots of people. We know about Ibn Battuta, for example, 14th century, a generation after Marco Polo. Marco Polo, his uncle, they went through Central Asia and they were serving the Mongols. The Mongols, brought a turnaround in the history of the Muslim world, especially of Central Asia. Lots of these historic cities like Samarkand, Balkh, Marv, Bukhara, and Nishapur and Baghdad, they were destroyed by the Mongols. And this is the time Marco Polo, the Venetians, he's serving Kublai Khan, the grandson of Genghis Khan. But in the process, Mongols either became Christians in Russia and they became Muslims in Central Asia and they became Buddhist in China and Tibet. So Marco Polo is very well known for having traveled on the Silk Road from one end to the other. And then he traveled through, Southeast Asia, India, Iran. And he's the first person to write a book about the assassin, the Hashishin of Iran in 11th century. So I've given you lots of names, but it's quite a bit of history, which is fascinating.
Of those names, you've mentioned people like Alexander the Great, Ibn Battuta, Marco Polo, names which are very commonly known even in the West. Is there a particular figure who you learned about as a historian who inspired your own travels along the Silk Road and beyond?
Well, I was born in a town in Pakistan in the Salt Range, and my street was called Bukhari Street, and my grandfather used to tell me that his grandfather told him about a saint, a Sufi, who came from Bukhara, and he lived here, and he was buried there. So every day people would go to his tomb. So this was another connection. This other major connection was Al-Biruni. Al-Biruni is considered to be the greatest or the most eminent Muslim philosopher, polymath, writer, astrologer of the medieval period. He came from Bukhara. He was contemporary of another eminent philosopher, Ibn Sina. And he did all his research about 25 miles from my birthplace. So I think I would say Al-Biruni really influenced me a lot. And I read his Kitabul Hind, which even today is considered to be the masterpiece. It's about Hindu religion. It's about India. It's about history. And it is not based on stereotype. He learned Sanskrit while based in Nandana, small town by River Jhelum. He worked with the Pandits, with the Brahmins, and then he used history, anthropology, his mathematical skills to write this masterpiece. This is 1,000 years ago. Interestingly, Al-Biruni and Avicenna were, contemporaries, and they both consulted the library of the Khan in Bukhara, which is now called the Ark, the fort. And I visited the Ark, or the fort in Bukhara, which, you remember, Bukhara was an emirate for a long time. It was the last emirate or khanate, which was captured by the Russians in the 1920s. And they brought their own destruction. But we have the photographs of the last Amir, who actually was sent into exile, and he lived in Afghanistan until 1944. So Bukhara sent lots of saints and scholars. So Al-Biruni and Avicenna, the most famous philosophers of the medieval period, not just for the Muslim world, but entire medieval history, they were from the neighborhood of Bukhara, and they consulted the books which were kept in the fort, in the royal library. And then Al-Biruni came east with Mahmud of Ghazna, the conqueror who attacked India 17 times. And Avicenna went west. And so I was influenced by their writings, but also I was influenced by Sufis. And one of them is buried here in Lahore. And actually this weekend, they are celebrating his birth anniversary, which is called Urs. And he's called Data. And he came from Central Asia, Junaidi. And he is supposed to be, which is partly true, he's supposed to be the first writer, a practicing Sufi writer on Sufism. The book is called Kashful Majub. So it is still considered to be classic. And then later on, I read Firdausi, who was contemporary of Al-Biruni, one of the most famous Persian poets. And before that, Rudaki was from Central Asia, who is considered to be the pioneer poet. So, in early session, Andrew was talking about poetry and 19th century famous poets. So these are the classical poets and storytellers, people like Ali Sher-Nawai, who really inculcated lots of interest and respect for Central Asia. And mind it, the Arabs brought in Islam, but the new blood was added into, Islam or in the Muslim culture by the Persians. And when the Persians got exhausted, and Spain was not in a sort of better shape for Muslims, Turks became Muslims, and Turks brought lots of knowledge, scholarship, energy, and mystical practices and literature into Islam. So as a historian, I see, Central Asians or Turkic people bringing lots of energies and lots of, qualities into Islamic culture, literature, and philosophy.
In the book, you describe this period as a time when Muslim cultures and learning exhibited unparalleled confidence and creativity. Which period in particular does this refer to, and what was happening to enable Muslim cultures to flourish in such a way?
I think it was before the Crusades and before the Mongols, 13th century. Until, I think, 13th century, Muslims were inquisitive, Muslims were taking initiative, and a Jewish scholar says that if there would have been Nobel Prizes at that time, all the Nobel Prizes would have gone to these Muslim philosophers, scientists, pioneers, mathematicians, literature. So I would say until the early 13th century. But then, these caliphates go on decline. House of Wisdom in Baghdad is in shambles. Fatimids have, declined. Muslims have lost Sicily already, and they are on the defensive in Spain. And then the Crusades happen, and the vigor, the initiative, and now Muslims become very, very defensive. And that is where I think the philosophy and science suffered a lot. American historian Frederick Starr calls it Forgotten Renaissance. It's a beautiful book which appeared about 5-6 years ago. And he talks about these philosophers and the undercurrents. He doesn't totally blame the Crusades and the Mongols, but these are, I think, two major, invasions and onslaughts which went on for generations, one from the West, one from the East. But I'm not putting all the responsibility on the external factors. I think the Muslims had lost the initiative, they lost the vigor, and all the sects, whether they were Sunnis or Shias or Ismailis or whoever, I think they were more concerned about conformity rather than being more innovative and outgoing. And that conformity, I'm afraid, has not left us. Maybe in the 19th century, people like Sayyid Ahmad Khan and some Jadidiyat people in Central Asia and Turkey and Egypt tried to revive that initiative. But somehow this defensiveness and so much emphasis on conformity and a so-called self-assumed consensus, they all have taken away that energy and initiative. So I would say that there are people after Tamerlane, and there are people like Mir Ali Sher-Nawai or Gohar Shah or Ulugh Beg, or there are people like Babur, and there are scholars in Ottoman Turkey, and there are scholars in Safavid Persia. But I think that vigor that happened in the first millennium of the Muslim history disappeared, and I don't think we have been able to repair it. And this happened in Spain as well, because one of the greatest philosophers of Muslims or in the world was Averroes, who was considered to be the founder of rationalism. And he was humiliated in his native Spain. He ended up in Fez, and along with Maimonides, the great Jewish medieval philosopher. They were teaching at this university in Caravine, in Fez, but they were all exiles. So I think Muslim world became very static, stalemate, and these external invasions did not help. And then I think there was more emphasis on conformity rather than on curiosity. But 19th century, again, with Western colonialism, Russian colonialism, Muslims have a great sense of loss. And then you hear voices in literature, in philosophy, in ethics, And, some Muslims are trying to find a synthesis between modernity and tradition. But I think the forces of tradition remain very strong. And sometime, even in 20th century, we see them becoming very, very coercive.
Obviously, for the book and in your life generally, you have travelled very widely, not only along the Silk Road, but further afield as well. Are there any particular cities or regions which you feel still embody an element of this golden age of Islam?
I think Samarkand always inspired me. The old Samarkand, the traditional Samarkand, which sort of exists. I think on the left side of these beautiful madrasas, which we call Registan, and around the tomb of Khanum, the queen of Tamerlane. That's fascinating. And then I mentioned this cemetery, historic cemetery, which is, from the time of Qasim bin Abbas, Muhammad's cousin. And all the beautiful tombs of princes and princesses. Most of them are Timurid. That was fascinating. And then I went to Prophet Daniel's grave because the remains of Prophet Daniel were brought from the Middle East by Tamerlane. Tamerlane brought everything back to Samarkand and his own native town. He wanted to make this region the most beautiful region. He destroyed lots of places, including Delhi and, others. But Tamerlane added to the beauty and historicity and cultural richness of Samarkand. So I like Samarkand and madrasas and the long grave of Prophet Daniel, which according to the local belief keeps on increasing in its length. And then I like Bukhara because Bukhara reminded me of many South Asian cities. It's not just South Asian by its name, but I think it's the closest city to cities like Delhi, like Lahore, like Agra, like Multan. Multan is a city of saints, though we don't look after our cities in India, Pakistan, sadly. So that was another reason I wrote this book, to reintroduce younger people and the senior people about this forgotten heritage and what we are doing to our heritage, urban heritage that we have inherited. So Bukhara is fascinating. And with all those, I think they have about 60 or 70 madrasas. They're all from the time of, post-Mughal period. On your website, you are showing us Minar-e-Kalan, the big minaret, which survived Genghis Khan because Genghis Khan wanted to destroy it. And something funny happened. He started laughing and he said, let's spare this Minar-e-Kalan, this big minaret. And it was the tallest building in entire Asia until recent times. So the mosque next to Minar-e-Kalan and Arab Madrasa and Masjid, they are beautiful, And then Chahar Minar in Bukhara, which reminds me of Chauburji in Lahore and similar kind of buildings in Delhi, because this is a kind of architecture. So Bukhara, Samarkand, and then I was fascinated by Khiva, and partly the reason they have preserved the city, and it's the first city on the Silk Road which was declared the World Heritage City by the UNESCO. So all these cities fascinated me. I would love to go to the ruins of Merv, because that was the biggest city during the medieval period until Genghis Khan totally destroyed it. Then Isfahan is another city which really inspired me. It's so beautifully kept, and I think credit goes to King Abbas the Great, who made sure that palaces, mosques, Maidan, and the covered bazaar, they become unique. And I keep telling my friends from India and Pakistan that they should visit Iran. It's next door, and they see how heritage is respected and maintained. Then I like Fez. I think this is one of the most impressive medieval cities in the world. We don't realize that we are losing that medieval ambience, especially in Africa and Asia. Fez fascinated me because I'm an academic, and the oldest university was established by a refugee woman, Fatima Al-Fahri. Yeah, and she established this university in 848. So you can imagine, we in 21st century, sadly, in some countries are still discussing or contending over women's education. But here were two sisters, immigrant refugee women, who came from somewhere else, maybe present-day Tunisia, and they established 2 universities, one on this side of the river, Jawahar, which is still working, which is where you have wonderful manuscripts from all over, Africa and the Middle East, and many Spanish Muslims and Jews who were kicked out of Spain with Inquisition and expulsion. They ended up in Rabat, in Saleh, and especially in Fez. So Fez is another fascinating place because I like those little streets. They don't allow motorbikes. They don't allow cars in the interior. And there's a Jewish mahalla, Jewish territory, like you have Jewish mahalla in Samarkand, you have a Jewish mahalla or neighborhood in Bukhara, which shows, this beautiful relationship that the Muslims and the Jews had for hundreds of years. So Fez is another place. Konya also is another lovely place, Sophia, if you ask me, because partly because I like Maulana Rumi, and he was from the Silk Road. He was from Balkh, and he had to leave. His father had to leave this part of the world. They went to Isfahan, then they went to Syria, and they settled down in Konya. And he is the most eminent Sufi poet. And so Konya is impressive because I had read about Seljuk kings, and there are 7 Seljuk kings buried there. Mullah Rumi is buried there, and Shams Tabriz is buried there, who was his teacher. And according to the tradition, you first visit the tomb of the teacher, which is very humble, very modest. So I would go to Shams Tabriz, sit there, do my meditation, and then I'll go to Rumi's tomb. And Rumi is so fantastic. He is like Andrew was talking about in the previous session. He's like Sadi. He could say all kind of thing in a poetic language. And everybody can relate with those stories of animals, of human beings, human relationships. So that's another reason. Rumi is the reason, perhaps. But I also, like cities in the West. I mean, I wrote chapters on Oxford, where I live, and the exhibits, the richness of the resources at Bodleian Library, Ashmolean being the first museum in the world. And recently they had a wonderful exhibition by a Muslim, a young Muslim artist from Lahore, Ali Kazim, who teaches at NCA. And this is the 75th year of Pakistan's independence. So Ashmolean has collection on South Asia, on Islam. And of course, I have great regards for Bath, where I spent 27 years. And the first English philosopher was Adilard, who was a scholar of Islam, who in the late 11th century, just after the First Crusade, left England, studied in France, and via Sicily came to Syria and spent 7 years in Aleppo learning Arabic. And he translated Khwarizmi from Khiva into Latin. And he introduced 0 and Arabic numerals in England. And he was from Bath. So I have all these cities which are in this book. Now, people will say, well, come on, Bath is not part of Silk Road. But look, Khwarizmi and Adilard bring these 2 regions together. And then one of the first English travel writer, Tom Coriat, was from a small village near Bath, who traveled through Europe, wrote the first, travel book in English, 1,000 page long. He was a student at Oxford, a student of history. And then he spent 8 months in Ottoman Turkey. Then he went to Syria, Holy Land, spent 6 months in Isfahan. And then he comes to India. He spent some time in Multan, our city of saints. And he had a debate with a Muslim who spoke Italian, because Italian pirates had kidnapped this Muslim who used to work on a ship. So Tom Coriat was surprised that so far away in Multan, thousands of miles away from Italy, there was a Muslim who was discussing Christianity and Islam with him. And then he met Emperor Jahangir because he wanted to meet the emperor. He visited Emperor Jahangir. And sadly, Tom Coriat died in India in 1617. So my recent book actually talks about Adilard and Tom Coriat and Mary Montego and other, British scholars and visitors who wrote about the Muslim world, not just the colonial writers on Islam, the British colonial writers, but, women, and especially those who interacted with the Muslim in pre-colonial. So Bath is so I've got lots of cities which are fascinating, and I have fondness for them. I like Lahore, though I am deeply worried about traffic and pollution and all that kind of stuff. So that is something which worries me and which is kind of destructive to the heritage. But Isfahan is very empowering. And I think there are other cities in Turkey, in Iran, in Morocco, which are very, very encouraging. So hopefully people will tend to these issues and will protect these cities long before it's too late.
The idea of protecting the cities, but also the intangible aspects of cultural heritage is very important. One of the things that you write about in the book, which I found quite sad, is the feeling that many young Muslims in particular feel disconnected from this rich cultural heritage. Why do you think that is, and what can be done to reconnect them and feel part of the great Muslim identity and great Muslim history?
I think I just don't want to blame colonialism, because I think colonialism was a challenge, and colonialism also was brought in lots of opportunities. And, when I talked about Sayyid Ahmad Khan or famous poet philosopher Muhammad Iqbal and, or Quratul Ain Haider and all these people, the famous writers, I think they had interaction with modernity through colonial institution. But I do feel that on the one hand, we parents want our children to learn about the West and to study in the West and to become modern. But at the same time, we are confused. At one moment, we are celebrating our past, and there is a kind of false sense of self-sufficiency. So we are responsible for confusing, our younger generation. And number two, I think, sadly, a major reason is that humanities and social sciences were not allowed to develop in post-colonial nation states. All these rulers of, God knows, 100 plus states, which became nation state or states after the Second World War, they always thought, and parents always thought, that we need to produce more doctors, more scientists, more engineers, and overnight we'll be able to compete with the West. And I think we thought humanities, literature, history, arts, philosophy, all these, or creative writing, they were luxuries, which poor countries like Pakistan or Uzbekistan or Afghanistan or Morocco could not afford. I think now, 2 or 3 generations down the line, when you meet scholars, when you meet people, they say, look, we need to produce good historians. We need to produce archivists. We need to talk about heritage. We need to talk about emotion. We need to talk about philosophy. So I think there is some self-questioning, but it's still, I think the dominant narrative is that you got to have more scientists. You have to have more PhDs in natural sciences. Even some of my colleagues in Pakistan really shock me when they say, oh, well, humanities are a luxury. We don't need that. And most of the problems in places in the Muslim world or dealing with society or of individual nature. And that is where you need humanities. That is where you need literary role models. That is where you need literary and artistic expression. I think we need this consciousness. And I think sometimes we blame the West. And I'm worried that West colonialism or today's West, they have become our easy alibi, while problems would be at our home level, where we have structural problem, where we have different kind of misplaced priorities. So West is a convenient enemy to blame for everything which is wrong in our part of the world. I'm not saying West was benevolent. They were here for their imperial or economic reasons, but this is sadly the history. Muslims are in Spain for 800 years. Muslims are in Sicily. So, so like I was saying, Bukhara was part of Hindustan, and Zoroastrian religion was the dominant religion of this whole Central Asia. And same way, so nations and civilizations come and go and they sort of share. But we need to move on. And I think individually, people are trying to establish. When Pakistan became independent, there were only 2 universities. Now they have 200 universities. I don't know about the quality, but it means that there is a great demand. And it's happening all over the Muslim world. Iran, there is a very high rate of literacy and lots of discussion on literature, despite all the sanctions. And you would have noticed in Uzbekistan and other Istans that women play a very important role, not only in literature, but if you look at literacy rate, at their empowerment. So Central Asian women could be role models for women in many other places within the Muslim world.
Is there a particular place on the Silk Road that you haven't yet visited but you long to see? You mentioned Merv earlier, but I was wondering whether there is anywhere else which has caught your eye and you hope to see.
I would really like to visit Merv, and I would look at the ruins of this city, which, interestingly, we have lots of archives about Merv. There were Egyptian visitors. Can you imagine? Just 4 years before Genghis Khan attacked and destroyed Merv. And this city had a beautiful system of irrigation. It was like Venice. It was a big city. So that will be a place I would really like to visit. But there are several other places. I mean, I'm fascinated by Jerusalem. I visited Jerusalem, and I didn't realize that there were Sufis coming all the way from Central Asia and Punjab and doing their chilla, 40-day meditation in Jerusalem. In Aqsa Mosque, there is a Muslim buried there who was a graduate from Oxford. And he was coming back from a roundtable conference during the nationalist period in 1931-32. He passed away, and he willed to be buried in Jerusalem. So all these places have mutual connections. And wherever I go, I keep discovering them. I mean, there's a whole lot of a big world, out there. And there are so many places I would really like to visit. I mean, I was in Oman and Kenya and Mauritius. I taught there. And there was an Indian Ocean connection. And, this is another area which many people do not really know about. Zanzibar and, Eastern Coast and Swahili. And I'm glad that, the Swahili writer who teaches English in England was Abdul Razak, was given Nobel Prize. And to some extent, people started talking about Swahili language and its multi-ethnic, national heritage. So there are places that, some of these people that I worked on, they visited these beautiful cities, like Freya Stark, traveled to Yemen, and Eric Newby went through Hindu Kush, wrote a beautiful book on Hindu Kush. And of course, Robert Byron wrote a beautiful book. That was one reason, Road to Oxiana, which made me go to Isfahan. And when Robert Byron went from Persia, at that time it was called Persia, 1932-33, went into Afghanistan. You know what he said? Finally, he went to Herat, the city of Gorshad, Queen Gorshad. So when he entered Herat, he said, finally, I'm in Afghanistan that has never been colonized. So there are lots of places, that one could go and enjoy, not just as a tourist, but as a kind of scholar and learner, and then see the connections. That's one thing. I mean, Adelaide connection I discovered by chance, and there is not many people even in Britain know about Adelaide. They know about the French scholar philosopher Abelard, A-B, B like in Britain, but they don't know much about Adelaide, A-D like in dollar, and he was born in Bath. And he spent time, and he was in Turkey when a big earthquake happened in 1114. And he introduced so many things like Arab cuisine, Arab hunting tradition, and most of all, zero and Arab numerals because earlier we used Roman numerals, and Roman numerals did not have zero. So these are the connections. And we use the word algorithm all the time. And it was from Al-Khwarizmi, Khwarizm, as you know. You were there 2 days ago around Khiva. So Khiva and this whole region was called Khwarizm, or Khwarizm as they call it today locally. So Al-Khwarizmi was a great philosopher, and he was translated by this Englishman from Bath while he was learning Arabic. And he must have met Umar Khayyam, the great astrologer in Aleppo. He must have met Attar or heard about Attar. These are some of the noted scholars. That's what this whole tradition is called Persianate, because Persian was like what Latin was to Europe during the medieval period. Yeah, so sorry. I mean, there are many more cities to see and learn, and I don't know. I don't think I will be able to go. I mean, Latin America is another place because lots of people from Europe and Africa and North Africa and the Middle East, especially Lebanon, migrated to Latin America, and that connection has not been fully sort of suggested or connected.
I'm going to now start asking questions from the audience.
Okay.
Mark Rees says, Professor, can you comment more on the link between Muslim reformers in the 19th, 20th century and their attempts to regain or re-represent their heritage?
Yes, I think this is a very common phenomena and very positive. And this was very tough going for these people like Sayyid Ahmad Khan in India, who established the first modern university in the Muslim world. People called him infidel and God knows what. And he just took money from the Muslims wherever they were, Bengal, Punjab, Madras, Bombay. And he visited Oxford, he visited Cambridge, he even visited Bristol, I came to know. And he wanted to establish this modern university to teach philosophy, science, Western knowledge to Muslim students. So he had tough time. But he published so many books. He went on his own to British Museum and he wrote a book on the Prophet in response to William Muir's biography of the Prophet, who later on was the rector of Edinburgh University. And he worked in the British Library, British Museum Reading Room, which was the main reading room in London at that time. He stayed at 2 different places. I have discovered those places. And he used to go to the British Library, Sayyid Ahmad Khan, every day. And he met Karl Marx, because another bearded fellow working in the British Museum, another bearded fellow was Thomas Carlyle, another bearded fellow was Charles Darwin, another bearded fellow, the contemporary of Sayyid Ahmad Khan, was Charles Dickens. So Sayyid Ahmad Khan moved among these people, and he had no problem with his own Muslimness or modern education that he struggled for the Muslims in India. Sayyid Amir Ali is another person from 19th century. Not much has been written. There's one biography. Sayyid Amir Ali was a lawyer. He was Indian civil servant from Bengal. He wrote the first 2 books on Muslim history in English, which was published by Oxford University Press. The Spirit of Islam, a short history of Saracens, because Muslims are called Saracens at that time, sometimes Mohammedan, Saracens, whatever. So Sayyid Amir Ali established Muslim League in London in 1908. And he served lots of Muslim causes. He used to write for Times, and he tried to convince the British government not to abolish caliphate because Turkey, or Ottoman Turkey, was fighting against the Allies, as we know, during the First World War. And he went to Mustafa Kemal, the founder of modern Turkey, to request him to keep the office of the caliphate. And he became persona non grata. He was a great leader, 19th century. His speeches, his articles, his books, worth looking at. And he's buried in Woking, near the famous mosque, Shah Jahan Mosque, the first mosque which was built in England by the Nawab of Shah Jahan, by Nawab Shah Jahan Begum of Bhopal. And then you have these modernists in Iran, in Persia, and you have in Turkey, Ottoman Turkey, and you have in Egypt, and you have in Bosnia, and you have it. But these are individuals because there are no institutions. But these individuals try to establish institutions. Fazl Hussain in Lahore tried to convince Muslims to send their boys to Government College Lahore, where I'm a visiting professor now. And that is how you got Iqbal and other people, famous people. So I think these modernists showed us the way. But now, sadly, again, this polarization between so-called revivalists and the modernists, which is happening in almost every Muslim country. I think we have to go beyond this polarization. So there were these reformers. These were the scholars. And Jadidiyat in Central Asia, in Caucasus, in Tatar regions. I think this is an area where we see that all across the Muslim world, and I'm sure in Africa as well, and Latin America, there were these modernists. Now, problem is that we have made modernism, Westernism, Westernization, modernity is so controversial in an ideological way that if you talk about these things, like what in Iran somebody said, Maghrib Zada, that you are influenced by the West, it's like a bad word. But these people in the 19th century faced such kind of insinuation, but they established these institutions. Aligarh, Islamia College, Peshawar, close to Afghanistan and close to Uzbekistan, is a beautiful university. It was originally called Islamia College. It was established in 1920 by a Muslim modernist, Abdul Qayyum Khan. So I think you come across this generation. But this British writer, Malik, who writes for The Economist and for The Telegraph, he wrote a beautiful book, The Renaissance. He believes that Muslim intellectual renaissance started to happen in the 19th century, but it was suppressed in the 1930s and onwards because of dictatorships, because of authoritarian system, both from the government and also from the society. So now we're still facing this challenge from these two ends, state and societies, authoritarianism. I think we have to face it and move forward, where this tradition of 19th century has to be rebuilt properly and in a very, dynamic way, not in a defensive way.
I think we have time for one last question from Samina. And she says, how can the intellectual linkages with Central Asia, and I would add to that, and also between other Muslim countries, be strengthened?
I think with social media, it's so easy. Now, and digitization of libraries. So I think the best thing is to build your own reading material and use it in the classroom if you're a teacher. And then translate books, like we were earlier talking about George Orwell, being translated into Tajiki or Farsi, which was very difficult. Remember, Orwell was banned in the Soviet Union. So I think we should translate. And Iranians are very good in that. I don't know about Turkey. I think there are some publishers in Pakistan who are doing that. So I think we need to translate works from different parts of the Muslim world, into languages. And we need to, include these topics into our course books. I know nationalism puts lots of demand on very exclusive kind of textbooks, and these boundaries become kind of unbreakable when it comes to texts and knowledge. I think we should really broaden the remit of our textbooks and our media channels. They should have programs on the country, especially in the neighborhood, Central Asia, West Asia, East Asia, South Asia, Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa. I think we need to, get out of this too much obsession, negative obsession with the West. And we need to universalize and internationalize our academic and literary efforts.
This is a topic which we could discuss for a dozen sessions, I'm sure. But sadly, we're out of time for today and need to move on to the next festival event. Thank you, Iftikhar, so much for such a fascinating conversation. I've put
Sophie,
the links
to
the Silk Road and Beyond and to your other books at the top of the chat box on the right of the screen, and I highly recommend them to our audience. Please do click through, see all of the books that Iftikhar has written, and buy them to read for yourself. I know that you will enjoy reading them as much as I did.
Thank you very much. And the book has been recently, a review has been published in Asian Affairs, but I'm not going to identify the reviewer.
I very much enjoyed reading it. I will say nothing more.
Thank you so much. And once again, congratulations to all of you and to the society for organizing this pioneering, festival. And I hope we'll have a South Asian festival where India, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Nepal, Bhutan, and Afghanistan could join together. At least, through literary,
The Silk Road stretches all the way down into South Asia, as far as I am concerned. So you're a very valuable part of our festival.
Yeah. Sure. Thank you very much.
Thank you.